Well, we are on, so we could just accidentally slip into a conversation if we wanted to.
We could.
If we wanted to do something like that.
The banana peel. Whoop. Yep. Here we go.
You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Our guest today is Dr. Janice Davis. Dr. Davis is an occupational therapist who focuses on mental health. Today's conversation focuses on the transformative power of listening.
So, Janice Davis, welcome and thanks for joining us this evening.
So glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about this. One of the reasons I'm excited about this is because you are an occupational therapist.
Yes.
I am an occupational therapist. This is the first time I've had a chance to have a deep conversation with another OT. First time in a long time.
Mm-hmm. It's exciting.
Yeah.
We have a lot to share with people.
Yes. Yeah, we do.
And I'm excited because I've spoken at your class a couple of times, but now
right.
you get to speak in our class, which is awesome.
Yes. Well, a lot of people don't know what occupational therapists are, and part of the problem with that is we do so much. We're everywhere. We're in hospitals, school systems. We're everywhere, but people don't really know what we do, and we basically help people through difficult times if they've had a physical event happen that's traumatic, like a spinal cord injury, stroke, something like that. But we also work in mental health, and that's my specialty. So I've always worked with people who have sometimes a chronic and severe mental illness, and other times maybe they're just going through a depression because of something that occurred in their lives. So I've spent a lot of time listening to people and a lot of time learning what listening is and putting labels on it. And it's interesting because you can just keep going deeper and deeper with it as you learn it. It can do amazing things to your life. It can change your life, which is, it's really not a cliche. It's changed my life in a lot of ways, a lot of my relationships. When I first started to listen, it was like, wow, this is interesting. And I first learned to listen in a counseling program. I went into a master's program many, many years ago, and my children were preteens, and I had been the kind of listener like, go to your room. What did you say? I don't care. And then I started listening, and it's like our relationships turned 360 degrees. We actually, I think, had much stronger bonds because I was able to really cut through some of that teenage stuff that goes on and get behind the whatever they were saying and understand them from a different point of view. And it really made us very close, I think, because they could trust me and I felt like I knew who they were.
Janice, could you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in all this? I mean, what we don't know, or some of us listening don't know about your background and where you're coming from and what drew you into this subject. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, Satch told you that I was an occupational therapist, and my first job was in a psychiatric hospital, a private hospital, where we had clients throughout the lives that we had pre-adolescents, adolescents, adults, and older adults. And a big part of my job was leading groups that focused on life skills, coping skills, assertiveness training, things that would help people cope better with what they were dealing with, if it was depression or schizophrenia or anything. And so I started observing the social workers and the psychologists, and I noticed, gosh, they're really using some interesting listening strategies. And that's when I knew I had to go back to school. And I went to get my master's in counseling at that point because I knew that the listening was the key.
Was there somebody there that you admired that was really good at it?
Oh, yes. There was a psychologist that I was lucky enough to get to co-lead a sexual abuse group with. And talk about trauma. We were talking about trauma before. There's a lot of trauma there, of course, and a loss. And so the way she would listen to these women and some men, you could see that they needed it so much. They needed to be heard. They didn't need to be guided. They didn't need advice. They didn't need someone telling them what they do. They just needed to be heard without judgment, without the need to provide them with a path to a better life. And so in my program, I was lucky enough to have some amazing teachers who role modeled this for me. And we had, obviously we went through a lot of role plays and things like that to learn how to listen to each other. And then we actually practiced it because we had to do some counseling in the program. And that just opened a whole new world to me because I could not believe how impactful learning how to listen to someone really was. And it's interesting because then when I'd go back to my psychiatric hospital, and I would sit and interview a client or I'd be in group, and I'd have people say to me, oh my gosh, nobody listens to me like this. And I started to get this feedback that I was like an amazing listener to them. And I wasn't an amazing listener. I was just doing what I was taught. But it's so rare, even in a psychiatric hospital where you would think that would be the place to go to get listened to. Mm-hmm. No. You'd go to the front desk and ask for a cigarette as a patient, and someone would say, this isn't the Love Boat, get out of it, go back to your room. There was all these judgments and a lot of the hospital staff weren't trained in listening either, or therapeutic use of self. And so there really was a lot of that, just kind of a disrespectful way to deal with people.
Were they pigeonholing the people?
Yes, absolutely.
The clients or the patients?
I think so. I think it was an us versus them kind of environment. But I learned through counseling, and probably part of my own just philosophy on life is that we're all on the same level. I just happen to have the keys to the locked unit. But that doesn't mean I don't have my own pain or my own mistakes that I've made or my own days of depression. And so I'm no different than you. As someone with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, I'm trying to live life just like you are. And so that made me, I think, to the patients that I was dealing with, someone that they really appreciated. And I would hear that over and over again. And so I knew I was onto something. And that's when I thought, I have to go teach occupational therapists how to listen because this is too good. This stuff is good. And I started then working for a local college where I taught some labs on days when I wasn't working or in the evening. And I started to see that students could be taught how to do it and that they became better therapists for it. Yeah.
Is it safe to say that listening to a person therapeutically somehow brings out the best in that person?
Yes, very much so.
What is that? How does that happen?
Well, I think because you're allowing them the space to find out who they are. We listen to people in order to help them think better because you're holding up a mirror to them. Is this what you mean? Is this what you're thinking? Is this what you just said? Those are some mechanisms, like restatement, reflection of feeling, and that helps them think. Okay, am I mad or am I more disappointed? You help them and you don't have to get it right. Okay, so if you're listening to someone and you might say, gosh, you seem pretty embarrassed about that. They might say, well, I'm not really embarrassed. It's more humiliated. Okay, so you help them think through all that chatter in their head and you kind of, okay, now I know where I am. So, Satch, back to what you were saying, you bring out maybe the best in somebody? Is that what you're
Yeah, I suppose
saying?
what I was asking is that just by listening, do you somehow connect with them in such a way that you bring out a better version of them, maybe, or something
yeah.
along those lines? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've had the same experience.
Okay.
You know,
I want to hear it.
funny, similar to you, when I was doing an occupational therapy fieldwork rotation, there was a particular social worker that was just a master at taking the awkward, strange, bizarre, difficult things that these mental health clients would say. And he could just turn them around somehow. You'd really hear what they were saying, and then somehow turn it around and reflect it back to them in such a way that it would diffuse the situation every time. And he was such a master of it that I was blown away by that. And I thought, I need to learn how to do that. It reminds me of a lot what you were saying. You know, that was my own experience. I'm thinking of a time when there was this man, nice man. He had very chronic schizophrenia. And this social worker was rubbing his eyes. And the patient said, so you got headaches, huh? You got headaches? You got headaches there, huh? So if you got headaches, that's terrible. You got to do. And he just kept going on and on with very, very pressured speech. And he said, you know what you need to do? You got to go to the store and you got to buy that stuff. You put the solution in the cups. You put the cups over your eyes and you wash your eyes. You got to do that. If you have headaches, we got to wash your eyes. And the social worker just said, oh, yeah, that sounds like something I need to look into. Mm-hmm. The guy just goes, oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Just diffuse the whole thing. And I just thought, Master Yoda.
Master Yoda. Yeah, and you see what he didn't do? He didn't say, hey, Joe, get your act together. Calm down. He didn't give him advice. He didn't tell him what to do. He got into his space. It's like with people with dementia or Alzheimer's, we talk about, don't try to get them back into your world of reality. Get into their world. And that's what you do with somebody, especially with schizophrenia. You get into their world and you make them feel good instead of bad about themselves. It's like I was once in a rehab unit, and one of the therapists called me over to work with this one gentleman who had a shoulder fracture, but he also had schizophrenia. And he happened to be talking about his hallucination, which was, look at all the blood in the trees. There's all this blood in the trees, kind of like your pressured speech and all that. And a lot of times therapists who aren't trained in listening want to say, oh no, there's no blood in the trees. They want to fix it and try to get that
you on your reality.
Exactly. Come back to reality and no, of course not. There's no blood. You're wrong. But instead, kind of like what you were saying, Satch, gosh, how does that feel to see something like that? That must feel, how are you feeling right now? And then you kind of bring it back to a reality that is there, but you're not feeding into the hallucination, but you're also not chastising somebody for having a hallucination,
right?
Or trying to get them to not have it, because you can't do that to people.
Yeah. What if it's code for something else that you're going to understand by asking the question? What does it feel like we ought to do about that? Mm-hmm. What are you feeling inclined to do about the blood in the trees?
Yes.
In NLP and in hypnotherapy, there's a saying that you have to enter the model of the world of the person you're working with first, and that's primary, because if you don't do that, there's no trust. They don't know that you are on their side, that you're on the same team.
Yeah.
Unless you can enter their model. And then from within their model, you might be able to encourage, support, maybe even help them change. Did you feel drawn to go this route immediately, or did you kind of fall into it after the nursing programs and things that you did? How did this progression of getting into this side of what you do happen?
Once I discovered it, it was like discovering a gold mine that I just wanted to jump both feet into. So I didn't tarry. I took what I learned in my master's counseling program and I used it with my patients in my psychiatric hospital. Then I taught it to OT students. Then I got together with a really interesting group of researchers in the field of communication who were focusing on listening, and started doing some research with them, doing a little more training. And I'm still training. I'm still learning how to listen. And my most recent endeavor is to learn more about compassionate listening, which is a different level. It is and it isn't. Compassionate listening is, it's been around for centuries. I mean, philosophers, Buddhists have been listening compassionately for centuries, right? But there's, in our modern times, this group in Seattle is doing compassionate listening to resolve conflicts in the Middle East between the Palestinians and Israelis.
Wow.
In other parts of the world, in Germany with the Germans and the Jewish people. And it's a whole different skill set, even though it encompasses a lot of the therapeutic and active listening.
Well, that actually leads me to my next question, which is there a difference between therapeutic listening, active listening, Socratic method? I mean, are they all related? Is it, are there different types of listening that you could define that?
Right. Yeah, there are different levels. So there's a superficial level called active listening. So it's just, so you're feeling pretty good today. Holding the mirror up, that's active. You're not just going, okay, and doing the dishes and really not listening, but nodding your head now and then. It's more active. You might restate what someone said. Like if a teenager says, gosh, I really wish Dad would loan me the car. I'm really sick of being stuck here. So you feel like you'd like your dad to trust you more. You want more freedom. That's a restatement. So those are kind of techniques that you would use in active listening. And active listening is tiring. I mean, you're working.
What are you working to do there?
You're working to mirror, so you've got to listen very carefully, and you're looking to restate so someone can think better. And that means that you can't be thinking about the next thing you want to say. And that's actually, it's harder. Most of us, when we're listening to people, we're not really listening, we're thinking about what we want to say next.
Yeah, or
right? Your
retort.
Yes, what is my retort going to be?
Yeah.
There's this thing called the Hurrier model, where the sound comes in, you hear it, but then there's other things you've got to do. You've got to interpret, you've got to analyze it, and then you've got to make a decision about what you're going to do with it in terms of the output. So are you going to just use silence? A lot of times just silence is a good listening tool. Are you going to reflect feeling? Are you going to restate? Are you going to maybe do a validation? Like, I really appreciate you telling me that. So there's all these little strategies that you can do with active listening, right? Then therapeutic use of self is just another layer, maybe the next layer down. And, you two are therapists, so tell me what you think. Therapeutic listening is really being authentic? Like presenting yourself as a real, authentic human being to the person you're listening to?
I say yes. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And when you authentically listen to the other person, even if they have cognitive limitations or emotional limitations, like let's say they have pretty advanced Alzheimer's, when you make a decision that I'm going to go ahead and value this person, I'm going to listen to them, there's something about that act that strikes an authentic chord in them, and they instantly respect you more, and they'll listen and they trust you better. Yeah. So I think being authentic, not just because this is the authenticity show, but the actual
how convenient
concept of being
somewhere.
authentic.
That's so
right?
convenient.
Yeah. Real authenticness, if you could put it in a bottle, is something that humans just have this innate ability to recognize, and it transforms the relationship.
Yes.
It reminds me of a time there was a lady, she was a long-term care resident in this skilled nursing facility that I worked at, and she was notorious for being mean. And I was warned by the CNAs, the RNAs, the different staff members, don't get too close, careful, she's a little mean, be careful, she'll smack you in the face, one day I was walking past her and I had these little TheraBands, for people that didn't know what those are, little exercise stretchy bands, right? And they're red or yellow or whatever the color was. And I hear her say, "Oh, gorgeous." And I stopped. And I was in a hurry. And I turned around and looked at her and noticed she was looking at the TheraBands. And I said, "Oh, would you like to see these?" And I squatted down, got at eye level, and I just let her, and she petted the TheraBands, and she was talking about how gorgeous they are. And just look at them. They're just beautiful. And she was nice to me forever after that.
Wow.
She just was. She was still mean to other people, but I went ahead and stopped and said, "Let's just go ahead and let her enjoy this. This is nice for her. She's having a good moment. Let me just foster that good moment." So I had to choose to be authentic for her in that minute.
Yeah.
And she was exposing herself, sincerely. And so we just sort of matched each other, and it was a good moment.
Nice rapport.
Yeah, it was nice.
Well, it seems like therapeutic use of self is definitely rapport-based too, because it's who you are and the connection that you build with that person that I think, at least from my perspective, at an unconscious level, they start to believe in the relationship. Therefore, they're believing in themselves to a degree, and that connection becomes a source of information and interplay that goes beyond the exercises you do with them, because they have this living idea, this felt relationship inside that continues, and it seems to have an active component of their thought process even when you're not around. So at least my interpretation of therapeutic use of self from my exposure from you guys really is that the quality of who you are and that relationship that you're building carries on and does something beyond the specific exercises you do. That you're actually helping them to get better, to feel better, and to get back to the things that are important, partly because they know they're supported. There's an internal recognition that I have this relationship with someone who's helping me, who cares about me in a professional way. There's compassion there. And so therefore, maybe it invites themselves to feel some of the same positive feelings for themselves in some way, to feel good about who they are in those moments, doing those little simple exercises or whatever it is.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. They can take that with them to their room or the next week when they go home or something, that I'm important enough to be cared about. I am cared about by somebody.
Maybe they believe in me.
Yes.
That's so powerful when someone believes in you.
Oh my gosh.
Man.
Yes, it really, really is.
You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Next up, Carlos and Satch continue their conversation with Dr. Janice Davis.
Can I tell a student story?
Oh, please.
Please.
So I had this really good student, and she went on field work, which is where a student is not ready to graduate and be licensed as a therapist yet, but they go to, it's an internship basically, and so they go work in a hospital or another setting, and they're supervised by a licensed occupational therapist. So my student was brand new student at this hospital. And one day, the group of therapists at lunch were talking to her, and they said, we're going to give you Mr. Jones down the hall. We're going to have you go talk to him. And then they kind of were teasing her and saying, we're going to send you because he won't work for any of us. He's really grumpy. He doesn't like anybody. He doesn't want to go to therapy. And we're just sick of trying, so we're going to send you. And of course, I can imagine what my student was thinking. And so she went down to his room, and, of course, he didn't want to go to therapy, and he was grumpy, and she just kind of took a moment. And instead of giving up, she just kind of started talking to him about some things. And she said, well, what is it you love to do? And he almost started tearing up. Eventually, I think he did. She told me that he actually cried. But he started talking about how he was an older gentleman and he was retired, but he loved to fish. And he thought, because he'd had a stroke, that he would never fish again. I think his vision for himself, that as she related it to me, was that I'm going to go home and I'm going to sit in a chair, and that's where my life is going to be. For the
Waste away.
Yeah. So, he couldn't envision himself at the end of a dock with a fishing pole in hand, safe, casting and all that. So my student said, gosh, I really appreciate you telling me this story. I think tomorrow I might bring in a fishing pole.
Nice.
And if that's okay with you, do you mind going out, maybe outdoors with me? We can take you outside and we can just see how you're going to, be able to use this fishing pole. And she just, of course, amazed all the other therapists, who couldn't get this man to do anything. But it was because she just took a moment. She took a moment to just, I'm going to find out who this guy is. I'm going to get behind the grumpiness, like you did, Satch, with your grumpy lady in the TheraBounds. Get behind it. Who is this person? And really listen. Don't chastise him for not going to therapy or tell him he should be doing something. That's why we have so much conflict in the world. We always want to tell people what to do. And a lot of healthcare students really believe their job is to help people, and that means tell them what to do. And so what I do is I take that away from them. And I say, you're not going to help today. You're just going to sit there and listen, and you're going to accept, and you're not going to judge, and you're going to give this person a gift, because you may be the only person throughout their whole day, week, month, life that has ever listened to them.
That must be really hard for some people to do.
Oh my gosh. It's very hard. Some students just can hardly do it because they are really stuck in their role.
Can they learn?
Yes. If I get on them enough and I say, nope, let's do it again. You tried to help me, because I'll role play with them, and I'll try to be authentic when I role play. Part of the compassionate listening training is to be real. So if you're teaching people how to be a compassionate listener, you really use something from your own life so that it is authentic, and they know that you do have a little point of pain or suffering.
There's that word again.
Yeah. So, and I role played that the other day with a student, and I said, oh gosh, my daughter's getting married. I have all these financial obligations, and I just don't know what I'm going to do. And she said, well, have you thought about this?
Oh, boy.
And I said, stop. Exactly.
Compassion before solutions.
Let's try this again. Just say, oh gosh, sounds like you're kind of in a place, where you're trying to figure things out. Yes, that's great. Another thing about listening, the way I tell my students, that it's working, and this, Satch, you know it too, Carlos. You'll see the person's breathing and facial expression change.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Because when you don't listen well, you will observe tension, maybe a look in the eye, maybe kind of a stopping of the breathing. And when you listen, you'll see this relaxation almost come about with with the speaker, because it's like, finally, I'm being heard. It's very obvious to me, but I've been looking for it all these years. But for students, I try to tell them, look at their breathing. If you're doing it right, they're going to be more relaxed. If you're not, they're going to be more tense, because nobody wants to be told what to do.
Wow, that brings to mind a pet peeve that I'd like to share, just in the NLP side of things, which is that very often, at least in my own experience, teachers and practitioners often, they jump right in with solutions, and they're directing your conversation right away, and they're doing pattern interrupts with you, verbal pattern interrupts, and trying to reframe everything right away. instead of just collecting data and absorbing what's there. And that can be really jarring for a lot of people. If the person's not ready at that moment, what you've done is you just actually broken rapport. They now feel unsafe. You know, all this talk about staying in rapport and NLP and things like that. But then, at least in my own investigation of it, it does seem like the people who do that are just afraid themselves of opening them. They're worried that if they listen, now I'm mind reading a little to say this, but it seems like they're scared to hear what other people's stuff is. You know, like they're so worried about getting caught up in the story because they want to focus on the structure, and there's a good reason for that, but it has to be done at the right time. Mm-hmm. Milton H. Erickson spent a lot of his time just listening and talking with the person, collecting data, processing it. I mean, it helped him to form metaphors that he could then fire back at the person, and it changed their lives because he could really make the stories he was telling fit the person. Mm-hmm. And so I remember listening to a lecture of his, just an audio recording of Milton Erickson. He was talking in front of like a whole room full of doctors and psychiatrists. And somebody asked him, well, how long, is a typical session with you? And he said, well, I don't have any particular length of time. I mean, it could be anything from 20 minutes to, 6 hours. Now, most people won't spend 6 hours with a client at one sitting or longer even. It could be weeks. But depending on the circumstances, because he really felt that for him to embrace the person's healing process, that he had to understand that person really well. Like we said at the beginning, entering the model of the world of the person you're working with, he would enter their model by understanding the model. The only way to do that is to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Listening is the key to their world. That's the theme, huh? Mm-hmm. Listening is the key to entering their world.
Yes.
So I have a question. Mm-hmm. Compassionate listening. How do you approach teaching that to somebody who maybe feels that they're not compassionate? Maybe they have a hard time with compassion. Are there ways of getting around that?
Yes. Let's go back to define compassionate listening as listening whose goal is to end suffering and resolve conflict and promote reconciliation.
End suffering.
End suffering.
Resolve conflict.
And promote or facilitate reconciliation.
Got it.
Okay. So let's say, I don't know if either of you have a brother-in-law, but let's say your brother-in-law.
We do.
And maybe it's not your brother-in-law, but we could talk about someone else's. That, for example, I'm going to use an example here. I was just up in San Francisco, and I was in another city not too long ago. What I'm noticing in these cities are all the tents that the homeless people are putting up. I lived in San Francisco 3 years ago. I moved from there to here. Okay. So I certainly saw homeless people in San Francisco, but when I went back last weekend, I was seeing a lot more tent cities. Everywhere I looked, there was a tent city. Let's say you're a person, and I bring up the brother-in-law thing. Let's say you're at dinner with your family and your brother-in-law says, gosh, darn it, I am really sick of these homeless people and I'm sick of all these tent cities, right?
Hypothetical brother-in-law.
Hypothetical, of course. But you're a compassionate person. So you don't quite feel the same way as your brother-in-law who's not compassionate, right?
Hypothetical brother-in-law.
Hypothetically.
Yes.
How do you, and especially in these times, with the divisiveness we have in this country with people who like our president and people who don't, this is the perfect time to learn how to listen compassionately.
Amen.
Because we have a lot of people shouting at each other. So you're at dinner with your brother-in-law, and he's complaining about all these homeless people that live in these tent cities and how I don't like to look at them when I go to work, and they're, always in the way and just annoying. So you have to teach that person You don't have to. But you could try to be a compassionate listener to them, even though you totally disagree with what they're saying. Okay, yeah, there are a lot of tent cities. I've been noticing that. Boy, isn't that makes you wonder why all these people are on the streets. So you don't argue. You just kind of go along with the observation. Yeah, well, I don't think they need to be on the streets. They could go, aren't there shelters they can go live in, or they need to get jobs? Yeah, gosh, it must be hard to have to live that way when you look around and so many people have nice cars and, so you respond in a compassionate way, and it kind of takes the wind out of their sails because you're not telling them you disagree. You're not arguing with them. You know how you can have some family arguments at dinner, right? So you kind of train them by the way you speak.
Yeah, that's a good key right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you train them by the way you speak. Wow, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great example because, asking the person, I wonder why that is. Why are all these homeless people on the street? That you're right. You're agreeing. You're doing a yes and. You're saying, yeah, that's true. And I wonder, what could we do about that? Or I wonder what people are doing about it. Or I wonder if there's something going to be done about that. And it's not arguing. It's just asking a question. And, it could really open up a conversation to say, if you were in charge, what would you do?
Oh, love it. Yes.
Or if it was somebody that you cared about, that could be a follow-up question. If it was somebody in your family that you cared about who had that circumstance, what would you do? Mm-hmm. It'd be interesting.
It would. But what if they said,
the question.
oh, nobody in my family would ever be homeless?
Yeah.
I know they wouldn't be, but what if they did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I read years ago that there was research that was looking at what is it that causes opposing groups to start to like each other. Mm-hmm. And really, it's having to get to know each other. Really, that's really what the answer was, right? Why is it that two different groups of people are at odds with each other? Because they don't know each other. Then they get to know each other, and then it's kind of hard to hate somebody that you know. I mean, within reason, Mm-hmm. But you have gang members from two opposing neighborhoods. How could they know each other? You go into that territory, you get shot.
Yep.
You can't get to know each other. Mm-hmm. But creating opportunities for them to have to work together to get to know each other in a safe situation is kind of hard to shoot somebody that you know.
There's an organization in Orange County called the Illumination Foundation. Part of their mission is to help persons who are homeless, who've been hospitalized, help them recover without having to go back out onto the streets too early, right? So they have a clinic where people can go and they can have a bed and they can have a shower and they can even have a nurse look after them if they have a wound or they have something that they're healing from. And so what I did with my students after I taught them active listening in class and we role played with each other, then I said, now we're going to do it for real. And the Illumination Foundation was kind enough to offer an opportunity for my students to go and just hang out in this clinic and have conversations with the people there. And these are people who are homeless, who are recovering from some kind of illness. So my students, a lot of them had never, they weren't listeners before, but they were now going to test out their new skills. After they came back from the compassionate listening and after the training, they said, one student said, I've grown up. That's how powerful is that? I've grown up.
Wow.
Another student said, this was a paradigm shift for me, which I think is huge. My view on how to communicate with people has changed tenfold, was another student's comment. This one I love. And and maybe we can discuss why you can help me understand why I love it so much. The student said, "It is now apparent that having someone to listen to you is valued within human nature." Now, I don't want to dissect that sentence for how it was written, but it is within human nature. To listen to you is valued. What does that say to you? What did this student learn?
It's like it's fulfilling a human need.
A human need.
Yeah.
It's like air and water and
Connection.
food and shelter.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
we need
right.
to be heard.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are social beings.
Yes.
And, you know, something about listening and listening well taps into that deep need to be part of something more than just
Yes.
an individual.
Belonging,
Yeah.
connection, love.
Yeah.
There's a lot in common between those three things.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Those are some powerful statements, Janice. Wow.
One student said that being a witness to someone's story is far more impactful than any piece of advice that I could offer them. That's when I kind of went, yes, because, you know,
Yeah.
there's that student who wants to give advice and fix. And I say, no, you're not allowed to fix
Yeah.
when you're listening.
That's a student who really got it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it really
That's good
is.
stuff.
It really is good stuff. I have another student story
Oh,
Love
please.
it.
that I just popped into my head.
We love fans of stories.
And I love stories too. And this was getting back to a patient with Alzheimer's. And my student was on a field work in a skilled nursing facility. And it was one of those same cases where here's this patient, client, whatever you want to call him, who was not doing what the staff wanted him to do. And this person, his behavior actually was yelling throughout the unit constantly, all day long, day after day. Where's Sheila? Sheila, where are you? Where's Sheila? All day long. And of course, he was probably looking for someone he cared about. We don't really know who she was. So my student took this patient back to his room, and the patient was yelling this, and my student said, well, tell me about who she is. You know, who is this person? And then the person was able to say something back to my student where they kind of got a little conversation going. And then my student entered into that, what do you call it, an NLP?
Oh, the model of the
in
world.
the
of-
model.
Yeah.
And said, you know what? I'm going to try to find her, and I bet you she's going to come any minute. I bet you we're going to find her soon. And the gentleman, looked at him, and I won't say his name, but he said my student's name. Oh, thank you so much. And he broke into tears. And he didn't yell out the name Sheila for the rest of the time my student was there. Again, it's
great.
just,
Yeah.
don't fight it. You know, don't fight what people are saying.
Yeah.
Get into their space, be a witness, give them that gift of just shutting your mouth and nodding
right.
your head and good eye contact now and then, and giving them some relief.
Yeah,
You know?
because you know that's a beautiful story, and it reminds me of this principle that when you do shut your mouth and just listen, don't worry. At some point, you're going to have to speak,
Right.
Yeah.
and now
that's
you're
true.
armed with all kinds of rich material. This is what Carlos taught me as in NLP utilization. You utilize what they tell you. They give you all this stuff. Then you go, oh my gosh, now it's time for me to speak. They're expecting me to say something. Now I have something that I can share, you know? Let me give an example. I remember there was a lady that I was evaluating. She was confused. She was in her hospital bed. And we'd had a nice long conversation, and I was asking her questions, and she was giving me responses. And we just had a nice, good heart-to-heart connection. And she was as loopy as the day is long. And all of a sudden, she looks at me and she says, "What are all these people doing in my house?" And I said, "Oh, I see. Yes, yes. So these people work here. These are various nurses. And of course, you know, being at a hospital, their job is to come into people's rooms and to do their daily chores and those sorts of things that are part of their duties." And I could see the wheels turning in her mind like, wait a minute. I'm not at home. I'm at a hospital. But because her and I had already created a nice connection, it was a nice, gentle way of not shaking her out of her delusion. Mm-hmm. It was a nice way of just giving her a little cue. And then she climbed out on her own and realized, oh, I was confused. I'm not at my house. Then she didn't have to feel embarrassed with me. She didn't have to feel ashamed that she was confused. Mm-hmm. And that was only because I spent probably 10 minutes just listening to her.
Yeah. Yeah. She felt safe with you and felt like you cared for her, and that's a nice story.
Yeah.
I like that.
Can I share an old story from my bouncer days? This is, I bounced nightclubs and did different kinds of, physical security at various places for about 20 years. And this was a long time ago. This is probably about maybe 15 years ago. But we were at a nightclub, and this is not an uncommon thing. This is something that happened regularly, actually. But this guy was causing trouble, and he had to be removed. And he kept saying, I'm going, I'm leaving, I'm stop touching me, don't effing touch me, and, so these bouncers, caught up in their ego, the heat of the moment, they were touching him, and he kept, shaking loose, and he was causing problems. He was fighting back, and it came out to where I was. And, I kind of put my hands up like, hey, I got it. I kind of asserted myself with the other security guards and told them, like, basically cut it out. I've got this. And I kept a certain amount of space between me and this other guy. And I instantly came to him as though I was the person he was waiting to see, like here I am kind of thing. And I'm listening to you. And I said, so what's going on? How are you, man? Like, how's your night going? Obviously not that great, but why don't you tell me about it? And we sat down. I actually turned my body so that I wasn't squaring up with them. Because, as you know, when you square up with somebody, they feel like you're confronting them. Mm-hmm. So I angled my body a little bit. It's also safer to be in that position physically. But, then I sat down. I kind of mimicked his posture a little bit. He was hunched forward. I hunched forward a little bit. I kind of took the same angle, which in NLP we talk about getting into physical rapport, right? At an unconscious level, it signals that this person's friend, not foe. They're part of me. And so we started talking, and he told me this pretty painful story. It was really short, but he talked about how his wife had just left him, and he was heartbroken and all that. And he just calmed down like really quick. I mean, within seconds to minutes, he was just conveying his story, and there was no more aggression. There was none of the, irrational fighting response coming out of him. He was just talking to me, and at the end of it, we shook hands, and I said, I'm sorry you had a bad night, and sorry about how that must have felt to you, getting pushed out like that, and at least we're here, and you can come back another night. Tonight, as you've had a lot to drink, and probably wouldn't be a good idea to go in there, right? And he's like, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't go back in there. I said, besides, you don't want to see those jerks. I just kind of took his side on it a little bit. And, we called him a cab. He took off. I got him to not drive. That's the other thing, because he was going to drive. But because we had rapport, I could then take the liberty of suggesting that he, take care of himself, that, regardless of what he's been through with the wife and all that, it ain't worth throwing away the life for. Yeah. It's, tomorrow you're going to wake up, may have a little headache, you may need to hydrate a little bit, but basically tomorrow will continue. The sun's going to come up, and other things are going to happen in your life that might be good. Yeah. So just listening to him, and I can't tell you how many times I see videos that are so aggravating. You see people being forcibly removed from various places, and the person is actually walking towards the door, and their hands are open, palms open. There's no weapons there. They're literally just trying to get away at that point. They're irritated. They're angry. They're threatened. But they're saying, I'm leaving. Stop touching me. Stop touching me. I'm leaving. And, inevitably in the videos that I've seen, they're getting manhandled by the police, and eventually ends up, that they're being tasered or beaten or whatever. And I've seen this over and over and over again. And all they had to do is step out of their ego for a moment and realize that just a little bit of listening would have allowed this person to exit the place, to retain a modicum of dignity
Dignity, absolutely. Civility.
And civility, and it would have earned those police officers an incredible amount of credit, I think. As a citizen, I would look at that and say, that's how you should handle it.
You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. This is part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Janice Davis. Dr. Davis is an occupational therapist who focuses on mental health. She's also an expert in the rare skill of listening.
I think sometimes people like you and I, Janice, who have students, we can sometimes find ourselves in situations where we're looking at the students as, these students, want to be spoon-fed everything. Oh, these students. Then there starts to become this group mentality amongst all of the teachers that we are the teachers and they are the students, and there are all these software patterns in their mind, and we've got to erase those patterns, right? And it starts to become adversarial. And the only way I can get around it is to just genuinely look at each one of them as an individual and listen to them and talk to them, and and not give them the opportunity to justify, their fears about how we feel about them.
Yeah. No, I really fight that. Although I can be a complainer just like anybody else. It's just kind of a pattern and part of the thing, part of the job. But deep down, I really think that they're someone I'll work with someday, and they'll be a colleague of mine. Mm-hmm. So I do try to listen. In fact, today I had a student come in and complain about something, and someone overheard me and was kind of chiding me about being so nice about it. And they're going to be a colleague someday. I'm going to treat them with dignity and listen to their complaint and make them feel like their opinion matters. It may not be right, mm-hmm. But I think we got to watch that. We really have to watch our attitudes. I wanted to get back to something Carlos said about and this must be an NLP technique where you kind of project a positive intention.
Yeah, so in NLP, there's a presupposition that perception is also projection.
So explain that and give me an example.
Yeah, if you walk into something with a belief about, let's say, an attitude about people, you're going to tend to filter for that experience, and your responses, your physiology, your tone will have a tendency to match your pre-recorded ideas, your pre-recorded sort of software that you have in there already. Mm-hmm. And that will unconsciously elicit the response that you're expecting.
Gotcha.
So you have to be careful that you're not projecting something that is a disadvantage for you, that's disempowering for you. So you have to always be alert for that. And even as a therapist or someone who works with people, you have to be aware of it too, because, little things can get in the way, like viewing the person as broken. This person needs to be fixed. Mm-hmm. Or, this person has a bad attitude. Or, oh my gosh, this guy's a complainer. Mm-hmm. That may or may not be true because, again, this is our judgment about it. But the question is really, what's valuable to me? Like, what can I use to help me get through this or to solve this? Or what's the best attitude for me to take as a pre-frame where success becomes inevitable? So you're focusing on what you want rather than what you don't want.
I'm just trying to see how this could be used or taught to students so that when they go into a patient's room, they're in that mode where they're hopefully going to have success.
Well, yeah. I mean, what we were talking about earlier about having respect for the other person's model of the world. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people hear that and they just kind of skip over it. But if you really think about it and you have respect for a person's model of the world, even if they've got a model that seems kind of, sick to us, if our intent is to help them heal, then we have to look at it with a sense of curiosity, even if we don't totally approve of it. Mm-hmm. even if we definitely don't approve of it. Having an attitude of curiosity could help you to elicit layers of it that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. And then you can, teach people maybe that having respect doesn't mean agreeing.
Right.
Having respect doesn't mean wanting to have that attitude yourself. Respect means you respect the power that model has upon them. If you respect the power that person's model has upon their lives, you can then step in and perhaps make a valuable suggestion. You can perhaps help them because they don't view you as an attacker. They view you as someone on their team. Mm-hmm. Be like the immune system of the body doesn't reject. Well, the psychological immune system doesn't reject the therapist because you're not seen as something to reject. So it's absolutely giving you the passkey or the passcode to get into their space, their mental space, their psychic space, their feelings.
I really like that. Yeah, I think a lot of Satch, you can give me your opinion too. Don't you hear a lot of students, or actually I see a lot of therapists even, gosh, what am I going to do with this guy? This patient won't do anything, or he doesn't want to go to group, or we hear this all the time, this kind of resistance from patients, and we need to find ways to work with it instead of fight it.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some martial arts metaphor for meeting resistance with resistance that doesn't work, right?
Right. So
you've got to think of some other way.
My approach has always been in that situation, give them what they want until they want what you have to give. So when a client says, "Oh yeah, no, I had occupational therapy at that other hospital, and it didn't do much for me," and then I might say, I'm really here for physical therapy, but I know that my boss doesn't want that. I need to try to see this patient, right? Then my approach was always to immediately go into listening mode. Do not go into problem-solving mode. Go into assessment mode. Like that's one of my big things personally, is like whether I'm dealing with a student, a person in life, a patient. If I meet resistance on their end, I go into assessment mode. And I think that kind of helps me do what you were just describing, Carlos, which is to it puts me into I have a structure which is neutral. It's curious. It's investigative. I feel like more like a neutral scientist, and I get to go into their world with more curiosity. And 9 times out of 10, that's enough.
When you say assessment, what are you assessing?
I'm trying to assess the entire nature of their resistance. So you had occupational therapy at this other hospital. Would you mind telling me what it was that you were working on with that therapist? They sort of, she wanted me to, do these little silly hand exercises. Okay, so silly hand exercises, and that wasn't going to work for you. Yeah, right, because I'm here for just my knee. I see. Okay. You're not here for hand stuff. You don't need to have your time wasted. Your knee. Okay, tell me. I need to understand more about this knee. Tell me about this knee. Well, since I'm not going to do therapy, what's the point? I would say, the physician wrote the order, and so I'm just going to do my due diligence and complete my evaluation. And by the time we get to the end of this, no problem. That's fine. So if you wouldn't mind just humoring me and let me ask the questions I need to ask, then I'd be happy to leave you alone. And they're like, okay, so then they start telling me about their knee, and then I would listen to everything they have to say, and I would do my assessment, and then I might say something like, okay, well, you are your own master, and I'm the last thing I'm going to do is have you do some kind of therapy that you don't want to do, and they'd be like, and I would kind of close it, and they would say, great, thanks. I said, but there's one thing I am concerned about. Do you mind if I share? Oh yeah, sure. You were telling me that you have a bathtub at home, and I'm a little concerned about how you're going to bend that knee enough to get into that bathtub. Well, yeah, that is, I think I'll eventually get there. I said, because physical therapy is going to totally do what you need, and they're going to work on your knee. I'd be happy to just work on the bathtub. If you want to go through that, you want to feel good about it, you want to make sure that you're confident when you go home, you just let me know. Yeah, okay, I suppose I could do that. Okay, awesome. Well, then we'll just focus on that. You know, and then so the assessment ends up creating more and more opportunities that they're telling me what they want me to do for them, but they don't yet know that that's what they want me to do for them. So I'm giving them what they want until they want what I have.
Gotcha. Gosh, that's really...
Yeah, I love that. Isn't that cool? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
very
discovery. How can you solve the problem without discovery?
Yes, exactly. You got to really define the problem, and you have to dig pretty deep before you can start fixing something.
You guys are such good therapeutic listeners. I can't stand it. It's great.
Oh, I know.
What a great investigation we're doing here.
Yes, yes.
Fulfilling our curious minds.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I was thinking about with listening to is you can't beat yourself up if you don't listen in a particular situation. You know, we all try, and I'm a teacher of listening, but I get in situations where I'm tired or, you know, I've got a lot on my mind, and boy, I'm not ready to listen. And so, you know, we have all these wonderful skills, and we have to know that we're human, and it's going to wax and wane. Some days it's going to be wonderful, and you're going to really be able to use all those skills. But again, I think we need to realize that it is very hard to listen, and it's not something that we can do day to day on a naturally easy basis, because it does take energy.
Yeah.
It takes energy to connect with another human being on a deeper level than we're used to doing. I think a lot about silence too. I think about our culture is so anti-listening right now because I don't know about you, but if I go into a restaurant and there's a television on, it drives me crazy. And all the noise, there's just noise everywhere.
That's annoying.
Yeah. And just to be able to be quiet and listen to someone and maybe not even talk. The Quakers, they have their worship in a circle, and they basically just let people talk without judgment or anything, right? Or advice.
I went to a Quaker meeting once.
How was it?
We sat in silence for an hour.
Wow. Did anybody speak?
At
some point?
Yeah. Every once in a while, somebody might speak out the name of a person. And it was the idea that as we all just sat in a room in chairs, we just sat there in silence and closed our eyes. It was like meditating for an hour in the presence of these other people. And somebody might say, Adam Jones. And everybody just understands that, okay, we're sending a little bit of, love and compassion to Adam Jones. It was a very peaceful experience, and it was a wonderful friend of mine. It was a fellow occupational therapist, actually, who I went to school with, who was a Quaker, her and her husband. And I went to that Quaker meeting, and it was a lovely experience. And it was all
I think that would
silence.
be interesting to see, because you're really using silence as a way to hear something much deeper.
In fact, right down the street at the end of the cul-de-sac by Stanbridge, where we work every day, there is a Quaker Center there.
Really?
I've seen it. Yeah. Maybe you and I should go over there and knock on the door.
We
and we'll just
should.
open the door and we won't say anything.
We'll just be silent.
Right. We'll just walk in and sit down.
Listening at everything that goes on.
Just do not ask them for oatmeal.
Oh, no. Do not do that.
That really aggravates them.
Yeah.
Quakers don't like
They
oatmeal?
hate that.
Yeah.
Quakers hate oatmeal?
Well, they hate that question because everybody asks that.
Quaker oats.
Duh.
Yeah, Quaker oats.
Gosh, that took me a while.
Dumb jokes. Who is this really for? I mean, you're using this professionally, but I mean, can't this also be used at home? And
Oh, gosh.
with their boyfriends and girlfriends and daughters
please.
and brothers and fathers and mothers and
I
wives.
think we should start teaching listening in kindergarten and teach it all the way up through high school, because it really will change a family. Think about all the teenagers, we've seen the movies, we've seen the videos. Dad, Mom, just listen, and the teenager is trying to say, our car broke down and that's why we're late and all this went on, we all want our children to be safe, right? But we usually do that through chastising them and yelling at them. But if we just kind of got to know them better by listening, yes, we need to set rules. Yes, there's a reason why we have curfews and things like that. However, it will literally change your life when you start listening to your loved ones at home.
So how can they really, or how can all of us practice this? Like really tangibly, like how could we go through the steps of what do we need to do to really bring this into our lives?
Well, that's a really good question, but it's not really something that we talk about a lot. And I think it's because we assume because we have ears that we listen.
Yeah, they're always on.
They're always on. Yeah. There are some few exceptions.
Right.
But for the most part, we think we're listeners. So that's part of we got to get over that first hurdle. Mm-hmm. Not really. You're not really listening.
When you teach the students how to do this compassionate listening, are there a few bullet points that you can use to get them started?
Yeah. Well, I tell them, number one, don't fix.
Oh, what does that mean? Don't
fix me.
Oh, don't
fix me.
Okay. I ain't broken. Don't fix me.
Yeah. Just listen. But we get very concrete. Okay. So we have a whole list of active listening skills we're going to practice. I kind of torture them the first night and I play a patient and it's a story that I always use because it's real and I can play it pretty well. And I go around in the circle and I ask every student to ask me just an open-ended question. Okay, because that's the start. That's where we start with listening. An open-ended question.
Can we try it?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Let's try it.
Let's try
so
it.
You're the patient?
I'm the patient.
Okay. And what are our instructions?
Yeah, I might have to swear. Because this patient
we can handle it.
But I'll try not to.
Yeah.
We're all adults here.
But darn it, why am I in this hospital? Why I don't need to be in this group.
Oh, and now we ask you an open-ended
You're
question.
the therapist. What do you say to me?
That's interesting. Tell me more about that.
I just don't want to be here. I don't see any reason. My life sucks. I just want to get out of here and go figure out what I'm going to do.
What is your life out of here like?
Well, I live in a trailer with a jerk husband who never comes home and never takes me anywhere. And I have a 2-year-old baby who just told me she hates me. So I must not be a very good mother if my 2-year-old hates me, right? Why should I live anymore? I don't have any reason to go on living.
If you had a reason, what would it be?
Oh, gosh, you're such a good listener, Carlos. You got me there. See what you did? You touched me. You touched my heart. Oh, now you've got me thinking about what I long for. Oh, my daughter, I long for her to have a different life than me, to not be with someone that is disrespectful, to have a home. See what you've done? You've turned me to mush right here.
Very nice.
Very nice.
That's great.
So just practicing open-ended questions. And it's funny because even though I'm putting on a role, it's not really me. I still feel the same feelings that woman might feel when I get a closed question like, oh, well, have you tried moving out?
Yeah.
And it just makes sense. Like,
are you thinking about divorce? Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I noticed just in doing that for the time that we did that I found myself fishing for something that I could grab onto. And I know that the idea behind my question was, what can I hear in what she's saying that leads to the potential of something positive? But I know that I'd have to be careful of having that fix-it attitude. Because if you had too much of that fix-it attitude, that could make me not a good listener, and it could make my questions seem false or contrived in such a way that I'm not really making you feel, as the listener, that I am listening to you. And I would want to do both. I would want you to feel that I care, that I am listening to you, that I'm recognizing you as a human being, but I'm also holding space, I guess, to use a modern new agey term, holding space for what I believe would make you feel better. So I'm asking you to think about it. Is that okay?
Well, yeah, because I don't think trying to make someone feel better is fixing. I mean,
Okay.
it is and it isn't, right? You're making him feel better. So, hey, yay, I fixed him.
Yeah.
But no, I think you're trying, that's a real gift, is to get someone to feel better in a dire situation like being sent to a mental hospital because you're suicidal. You know, how do you feel better about that? But you can make somebody feel better.
Thank God
and
you're
look-
finally with a bunch of professionals who really care about you.
Exactly.
And we're going to take care of you.
And we're going to take care of you. And you know, there's a time to fix eventually, but you don't want to fix until you have all the information. It's like your assessment. You got to get all the information before you know what to fix. And things are deep, you know. She didn't want to commit suicide just because her 2-year-old daughter said, I hate you. And so part of our job is to say, you know, that's pretty normal for a 2-year-old. So there is some education that can be done, and that's fixing. But first, you have to really understand the big picture.
The question is the answer. We say this a lot in NLP. And there's the Charles F. Kettering statement, which is a question well formed is a problem half solved.
Oh, yes, I've heard that.
You know? And, you know, I think that the Socratic method is obviously when you create the inquiry back and forth that helps you to get involved with the problem solving with the person by asking the question. You're not solving it by telling them what it is, but
Yes.
you're, in a way, you're guiding them. And even if whether you as the quote unquote guide or teacher knows the answer or doesn't know the answer, you still have the opportunity to ask the question, and then the two of you can figure it out.
Love it.
You know, I know
Yeah.
when you're coaching, you don't always know what's best for them, but you can find out if you ask the right questions.
Carlos, to try to put that kind of in more tangible terms, is the Socratic method, is that sort of like if somebody said, like you just said, Janice, oh, my 2-year-old says she hates me. We get into, and what is hate? Is that sort of the Socratic method?
Or maybe asking about, you know, what are 2-year-olds supposed to feel?
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
what are 2-year-olds in settings like they're in supposed to feel about the settings they're in?
Okay.
You know, the
I see.
environment.
Yeah.
You know, it's starting to ponder the question of, is this normal? Whatever that is, right? They start to ask that question of themselves because, wait a minute, maybe it's a totally healthy response to feel moments of hate if the circumstances call for it. And maybe that could be therapeutic because they need to know that they're not crazy and that maybe it's okay. Like maybe that's a stage, it's a step along a path. And then Socratically asking the question might stimulate the realization as a byproduct that I can relax. My kid's not nuts, you know, my kid's going through something that's healthy. And the fact that my kid experienced that hatred means, and that this is where the reframe happens, right? It means that my kid's going to, you know, eventually stand up for, you know, his or herself and reject situations that aren't healthy because they recognize that it's unhealthy. So the very thing that you don't like can be something that provides insight and also can be reframed as something positive.
Very nice.
Whereas if you just looked at it two-dimensionally, oh, well, the first snapshot I see is that I don't want them to be hateful or spiteful. But then again, the reframe is really there, and you're not really stretching it. If you think about a growing, budding human being, you're not stretching it to say that there's a progression of learning along the way. It's true.
Yeah, that is true.
Everyone who still lives will learn more and more every day. So
Yeah.
you're stating an obvious truth.
Nice.
Or maybe it's not an obvious truth, but it's a truth.
But that brings up the topic of research on listening, which is kind of interesting.
Okay.
Some of the older research looked at how soon people are interrupted by their physician on a typical office visit. And it was like within the first 18 seconds or something. And then there's other statistics that talk about how a lot of patients would come out and tell researchers they never really got to something they were truly worried about to talk with their physicians because there wasn't an opportunity. And that tells me that the physician was probably not using really open communication where anything was a viable topic. I don't know. A lot of people fear going in, and when you're sitting in that room and the doctor's in a hurry and you've got a few minutes with them,
Yeah.
you really got to have a good listener to get everything out, I think, that's worrying you. And, you can be the best surgeon in the world, but if you don't have good communication, you're the one that's getting sued. I mean, a lot of litigation is around the fact that you didn't listen to me.
Yeah. I believe I heard this on a show. They were researching medical mistakes and who got sued and who didn't get sued. And they were trying to investigate what was it that caused certain doctors not to get sued. And the research demonstrated that it was a simple apology.
Yes.
When the doctor came in and said, look, I dropped the ball and I didn't approach this the right way and we made a mistake. And, this is what happened. I want to tell you myself. If they just apologized, their chances of getting sued plummeted. When they try to get into defensive mode and they try to protect themselves and protect the hospital and they're more likely to get sued, which is funny because that's probably not what a lawyer would advise you to do. A lawyer would say, don't admit to anything.
Oh, yeah.
But we can say lawyers are wrong sometimes. The research indicates that an apology works.
Well, right. And this gets down to the whole thing about listening. It's like, who's boss here? Physicians are very highly regarded in our country and in many countries. But again, we've got to remember that we're all on the same level. We're all human beings. And I just hate that when people say, never apologize. You hear that. Never apologize. Well, why not?
It's so Ayn Rand of them.
Yes, exactly.
Ayn Rand would approve of that.
Yeah. So, to me, it just gets back to that authenticity, therapeutic use of self, just being real.
Yeah. If you are sorry, go ahead and express that you're sorry. If you're not sorry,
Yeah, if
okay,
you're not
then
sorry,
don't.
you're not going to say it.
Be authentic about
There's
it.
tons of research now, currently, on, the apology as a way of influencing and persuading someone. You can apologize ahead and get in the front of the line.
Tell me how to do that.
Well, it's like, you stepping in front of the line, you're like, I'm sorry, I'm just going to step in here. Is that all right with you? Because, and you give a reason, whatever that reason is. The studies show that when you do that, a statistically high amount of people will be okay with it.
Very interesting.
Whereas
but
when
the
you don't
because
say
is
that,
important.
the because is important because it creates a reason, it links it to a reason. And for some reason, when you hear because, it links to that part of the mind, which is equating it with something. It's like when someone reaches their hand out to shake your hand, the instinct, you may have even felt a twitch of wanting to reach for my hand as I lifted my hand up just a little bit, because a part of you recognizes that as the trigger for you to reach out and grasp hands. It's a reflex.
I have a side story about handshaking that I could share. I had a patient who developed intracranial pressure in his head, and he was having all kinds of, cognitive and motor planning problems. So he couldn't follow certain commands. So I would say, reach out and touch my finger. And he understood my words, but he couldn't get his brain to send the plan to his arm. But if I stuck my hand out to shake his hand, he could reach up and shake my hand.
Oh, wow.
So I taught him how to overcome his cognitive limitation by starting off with a handshake.
Wow.
So I would say, hey, shake my hand, touch my finger. And he'd start to shake my hand, and then he'd be able to touch my finger. And I would say, okay, now I'm going to ask you to touch my finger, but I want you to think about shaking my hand. Can you do that? Yeah. He'd touch my finger. He'd think about shaking his hand, and he'd reach up and he'd touch my finger. Then so he got to the point where he could start doing things again because all he had to do was think about shaking his hand, somebody's hand first.
That is.
But that says something about automatic
amazing.
responses.
Yeah.
Even when a person is having neurological damage and they're not able to follow a command, they still can respond to a handshake sometimes.
But stuff like that is magical. I mean, to the observer, that looks like a miracle that you did that. It is genius to take advantage of what you know is going to work and to link it, to map that experience across to the other thing that you needed to have happen. That's brilliant.
It was very fun. It really was fun.
Yeah, magical results.
listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Next up, Carlos and Satch continue their conversation with Dr. Janice Davis.
Okay, I've got this lingering question about apologies because I don't know about you, but I was raised that you should always apologize. But then there's this other message from different like lawyers for don't ever apologize, or who knows? There's different people that will say those kinds of things because you want to be powerful. You know, it's all about your power. And then I always think, well, it's the strong person who can apologize. So I guess I want to know what your thoughts. Is there any weakness in apologizing?
Well, isn't part of power the ability to persuade?
Yes.
You know, to be effective. That is one aspect of power. Mm-hmm. And if you can be mentally and emotionally flexible enough to apologize, it opens up a whole world of positive influence.
I like you.
I like you too.
I feel so much better about all the apologies I've given in my life.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked that question because I am an apologizer. I tend to apologize. We could look at an apology as being for the person that we're apologizing to, or we could look at the apology as being something that does something for me, the apologizer, at some sort of energetic level. I feel like if I apologize to somebody, I am correcting some sort of flow of energy in myself that becomes more effective. And now I can communicate better. And now that person trusts me better and we've started something. So it's about me and it's about them. But I don't see any weakness in that at all. Yeah.
Ho'oponopono.
Oh, yes.
Right?
That's right.
Ho'oponopono is the Huna tradition practice of forgiveness. It's a practice of making yourself right with the universe, right with the world, to put things right again. Mm-hmm. And there's a personal practice of Ho'oponopono, and it's also something that's done in groups to facilitate conflict resolution. And I've heard that in Hawaii, there are some judges that will actually offer the opportunity to do Ho'oponopono instead of whatever punishment there was. Because it's a recognized, an officially recognized path toward remedying whatever it was. Maybe they stole some cars or they broke into a house or got in some fights or whatever it is. And they see that as a really powerful thing, the tool of not just apologizing, but really repairing whatever it was that was underneath the problem, what was creating the underlying condition of the problem. And it's beautiful.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's
but
gorgeous.
What you said, Satch, about changing what it is that's inside of you, that's what Ho'oponopono is all about, is cleansing, changing that. I've heard another way of putting it is cleaning the data.
Yeah.
That it's the data that's the problem. The data which is telling you that you should hate this person or that you should behave in a particular addictive way or whatever it is. And by clearing that data or cleaning the data, that's the practice of Ho'oponopono.
Wow. That's like when my phone works better because I delete apps that I don't need.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Or you take a nap and suddenly your memory works better.
Right.
Naps
Very
are
nice.
awesome.
Wow. So do you think that apologizing is a form of gratitude?
Yes. I like that. I like how you put that.
Yeah. If I did something, whether it was intentional or unintentional, and I upset you, and I am grateful for you being in my life, for me to apologize, it's honoring, the gratitude that I have for this other being, and the relationship that I have with that other being. So
That's
apologizing
a great way to think about it.
is powerful, and it's an honorable, quality to develop.
You were making me think about the Native Americans and their councils where they would all come in and sit in a circle.
Yeah.
So, they would have the talking stick. And they would pass it, they would put it in the middle. I think I've read some of this where anybody who wanted it could go pick it up. And they didn't have to talk. They could just hold it for a while and then they could pass it on to someone else. And that person could then talk. And no one really commented. There was no commentary. It was just allowing people to voice whatever they wanted to voice. So you can probably Google this and look up the man's name, but there's a Native American who's done work in prisons. And what he's doing is allowing these prisoners to sit in the circle, take the talking stick, and express themselves without judgment. And the article I was reading about said that most of these people in prison have lived a life full of being judged, full of being told what to do, probably a lot of negative feedback. And this is apparently causing a huge transformation in the prisoner's view of self. So instead of being a mistake, a bad person, however they label themselves, they are starting to have compassion for themselves and really changing, which to me is, when I think about our prison system, we have more people in prison than some countries have population,
Yeah.
To think, how do we get people to listen to their children so they, to listen to themselves so that we can have a healthier culture?
That's a valuable point. All these things are connected, like listening and forgiveness and things like taking responsibility. Those are all interwoven. I mean, if you are truly to give a sincere apology for anything, it means that you're taking responsibility for yourself, your feelings, your actions. To be a good listener, it seems like that falls hand in hand, that you need to take responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Yes.
Boy, what a great society we would have if everybody learned this in kindergarten.
I know.
We talked about that earlier. Yeah.
I know.
And without blame, and you're talking about the prison system and the talking stick, and that that can be a way of conflict resolution. Well, I think the two of you have heard of nonviolent communication.
Yes.
Right. A lot of that is about checking in with the way you're coming across and making sure that you A, are listening, but B, that what you say is not harmful by blame. By using blame to accuse and things like that. It's more about talking about the feelings. You mentioned that earlier in the show. I can tell you that in my own life and also in counseling settings too, so personal life as well as professional life, that's been invaluable to just talk about the feelings and to shift the focus away from blame and back onto responsibility. Hey, I'm taking responsibility for my words, my thoughts, my feelings, my actions, and for this process, and inviting the person to take responsibility for themselves. And can we have a loving or open, at least, conversation about how we feel with the intent of having understanding to resolve this? Because it isn't necessarily about all the little things that happened or who said what, he said, she said, or the chronology of events per se. Once you listen to how they feel, a lot of the energy of attack is sort of sapped and taken away from the conversation. You can drain a lot of that just by not being defensive, by saying, yeah, bring it. Tell me, how do you feel about that? Wow. And relating, active listening. I get that. So what you're telling me is that really, really pissed you off when you heard me say that. What I'm getting is that, you're telling me that made you feel insecure, made you feel belittled, or whatever it is. And you're just repeating back to them with the intent of saying, I can listen to this person. I can care about how they feel. And it's no reflection upon me as a human being because it's their feelings. And you have a right to feel what you feel.
And this is beautiful with teenagers. I just have to get back to the teenager because if there any parents are listening who have teenagers, you know how easy it is to have breaks in your relation, to have moments where, oh gosh, this kid's going to hate me for the rest of his life, or they're going to move out and I'll never see him again.
Disconnection.
It's so easy. Our words matter, and we can hurt people by what we say. So if you can just use this with the people that you love and want to stay in your life forever, like your teenage children or like your brother-in-law or whoever.
Hypothetical brother-in-law, of course. I mean, it just will really make a difference.
You know the old saying, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. I know the answer to that.
Oh.
It does not make a sound. It makes sound waves.
Oh.
So the point is, right, it's just physics until there is one there to listen. And that transforms the entire thing into an experience. And so to listen to another person, I mean, you literally have to stop and sacrifice a certain amount of time in your life. We're only on this planet for so long, then we're going to die. So every time you listen to somebody, you are offering your precious life energy to listen to them. And that is that is nuclear power right there. It's very, very powerful. So that's why I think, or that's one of the reasons why it's probably so powerful and so transformative to people, right? Is you're saying, I'm going to die someday, but I'm going to spend this time and I'm going to connect with you right now and I'm going to listen, you know? And sometimes it's just another person's willingness to listen, even if you don't need them to. I can share one of these one time,
Okay.
right? There was a time Carlos and I had a conversation, and you, Carlos, were a little bit concerned about the topic, and you were a little concerned that maybe I was upset about our conversation. I was somehow
yes,
offended,
I
right?
remember. Yeah.
And you called me, a day or two went by, you know, and you called me, and you just wanted to check in and make sure that you didn't upset me, or you know what I mean? And I wasn't thinking about the conversation, you know, a day or two later when we spoke, I we left the restaurant and I wasn't thinking about it at all. But it meant so much to me that you were thinking about it, and that it meant a lot to you that you didn't want me to be upset about it. Just the fact that you reached out to talk to me about it, my goodness, what did that do for our relationship? It was like, man, see how awesome Carlos is. See how caring he is. He was thinking about this, and he values me, and it bothered him just the thought that I might have been upset about something and you had to clear it up. And I wasn't upset about it, you know? But my goodness, just the fact that you reached out and wanted to hear and make sure that I wasn't. Holy cow, was that powerful? You know, it really was, you know?
That is powerful. And it's so beautiful when you can be, when you can trust somebody enough to know that it's okay to not protect yourself all the time. And we go into the situation with our armor on, you know, Iron Man, right? You know, we go into, like, we're going into battle all the time. And there's so many people that I've met who really haven't learned that it is safe, that you're much more powerful than this moment. It's okay to be vulnerable. You know, nothing bad's going to happen. It's a mindset. It's okay. And so I knew in that moment that I was checking with you because I cared about your feelings, but also because I knew that I was sensing that I lost track. And usually I have a sense of a groove or a kind of a feeling of my own rhythm. And I knew that I that there was some gaps in my attention in a way that I don't usually feel. And I thought, I lost track there. I'm worried that maybe I may have overstepped, or that my ego might have, offended you in some way. So I just wanted to check in because I trust you that you'd always be honest with me. And it's great to have that when you can step into something, a relationship with somebody that's based in trust, based in, the safety's there. I can be vulnerable, and it's not weakness, it's openness.
Yeah.
And it
Nice,
deepens and
nice.
makes a friendship deeper.
Right,
You know?
right. Totally.
Yeah, that's so important.
Transformative.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's one of the barriers to, reconciliation, or whatever you want to call it, is just that fear of exposure. But to be vulnerable can be a sign of strength, or to allow yourself to be vulnerable. It's interesting, in the compassionate listening training that I've done, the trainers always speak about something in their own life that they're upset about, and it's very authentic. So you really get the sense that no matter who I'm with, that person is a human being. You don't put anybody on a pedestal. I once had someone walk by me, and this was some divine intervention or something. This man was walking into a store, and I was walking out, and he looked at me and he said, "Who's better than you?"
Wow.
I went, whoa. Because, I was raised on, oh, that person is somebody. That person is better than you. Or who do you think you are? And that's compassionate listening is all about, wow, everybody has problems. Everybody has struggles. Everybody has fears. And that is so freeing to me.
So Janice, what resources are available for people if they're listening to this and they thought, you know what, I relate to a lot of things I heard here, but where do I begin?
Go look at the Compassionate Listening Project website. It's very good. They're up in Seattle. They have trainings periodically, and they have a beginner and then an advanced compassionate listening training. It's interesting. They just had a training that focused on the conflict between people who are pro-president against president
Well, that's a good
right
one.
now.
Hot
And
topic.
so I'm anxious to see how that one went. But it was to train people how to have a compassionate dialogue about our differences. There's a lot of TED Talks on listening. So I would Google TED Talks on effective listening. Let's see, Judy Brownell, Brownell, has a really good book on listening, and she goes through therapeutic listening to listening for pleasure. She goes through all the different contexts for listening. There's a book called Time to Think, and that is an excellent book, but it's a little complicated. It talks about strategies to get people to think better through your listening. And the premise is that you have to listen and query people about what their assumptions are about their situation. So it's a little deep, but I think Time to Think is a really good book to look at if you're interested in. It's going at a deeper level, though. So yeah, I think there's a lot of information on the internet about listening. Listening as a parent. There's a lot of resources for parents on how to listen to children in adolescence.
That's great.
And that's easy to Google and find. So yeah, it's out there. It's out there. And, start a community of listeners. If you want to.
Oh, you're reminding me, I went to go to the store, and there was a lady out in the front of the Sprouts with a big cardboard cutout thing she was holding, and it said free listening.
Yes, I've seen that before, and I love it.
It was awesome, and I at first I was a little, I was tickled, and I had my groceries and I put it away, and I came back. I said, hey, you know what? What's this all about? Like, tell me. And she just said, well, I'm just volunteering to listen. So if you have anything you want to talk about. I said, about anything? And she said, yeah, absolutely. No judgment. I'm just here to listen. So I said, for how long? She said, as long as you want, as long as I'm here. And I said, wow, that's really interesting. And so I started asking her some questions, and then eventually started talking to her a little bit about that. And, I just thought, what a great idea, because in the long run, if people did that more, there'd be a lot less angst. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's like the free hugs campaign, right?
Exactly. So did she use a lot of silence? Did she primarily just sit in silence? She just listened. I mean, of course, she answered my questions, but basically she just listened. She said, yeah, anything you want to talk about. Yeah. Doesn't matter what it is. It's an opportunity to dump, to just get it all out there and just walk away.
That is something that people can do, I suppose, right? Like you can walk out, pick a day of the week, or a weekend, and put a sign on or wear a shirt that says free listening and go out there and practice. Yeah. Get out there, listen to people, and don't judge, just listen.
Mm-hmm. That would be an excellent way to start learning how to listen. I thought about doing that myself because I've heard about people that do that. I just haven't quite pulled the plug on it, or what do you do? I don't want to pull the plug.
Pull the trigger.
Pull the trigger.
There you go.
Yeah.
Bang.
The listening hour.
The listening hour.
Maybe each person could secretly pick 1 hour of the day and just say, that is going to be the hour that I am just going to be a kick-ass listener.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Every day from 3 to 4, I'm going to just turn up my listening.
No one even needs to know.
Nobody even knows. And then maybe you can get brave and do it 1 day a week. Every Thursday.
You know what'll happen?
Right. Covert listening.
People will start looking at you funny, like, what happened to you? And then they might start kind of wanting to be around you more because you're offering something that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so be careful who you do this with.
Well, you might want to.
I'm just kidding.
You might want to.
I like it. Yeah.
Well, it's been fabulous listening to both of you tonight.
Same here. This
Likewise.
has been fun.
Yeah.
And we're super grateful for the listeners out there that are listening to us.
Yes. Keep listening.
Janice, always a pleasure seeing you. Thank you for coming over and sharing more of your wisdom, because I think this has been a great opportunity to learn more about what interests you and your areas of expertise. And I do hope that you will come back and talk with us more about this and other things.
Thank you.
You're a wellspring of knowledge and experience, and we respect you highly.
Well, thank you, Carlos and Satch. It's been fun.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. A very special thanks to our guest, Dr. Janice Davis. The show is produced by Oliver Althoen. Our theme music is composed by Oliver Althoen. You can find more information on our website, AuthenTicityShow.com. Thanks for listening, and have an authentic day.